One of the best years of U.S. history was the year of 1920. 1920 was a time of speakeasies, short skirts, the Charleston, and jazz. The 20s are referred to as the Roaring Twenties because of their emphasis on having fun and spending money. Pop culture changed a lot during 1920. Famous and influential films like Huckleberry Finn were introduced to the public. Women's rights made important progress that year as well. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted American women the right to vote. It was ratified on August 18th of 1920, ending almost a century of protest. Throughout the 1920s, the U.S. economy expanded rapidly. Consumerism was booming, and the nation's total wealth more than doubled between 1920 and 1929. The year of 1929 was one of the worst years in U.S. history because after years of economic success, it marked the beginning of the Great Depression and was full of hardships for America. On October 24th, Black Thursday, traders sold 12.9 million shares of stock in one day, triple the usual amount. Over the next 4 days, stock prices fell 23% in the stock market crash of 1929. Then, on October 29th, share prices on the New York Stock Exchange completely collapsed, becoming the worst stock market crash in the history of the United States. This day became known as Black Tuesday and was a pivotal factor in the emergence of the Great Depression. It started a worldwide economic crisis going all the way into the mid-1930s. The Depression caused many farmers to lose their farms. At the same time, years of overcultivation and drought created the Dust Bowl in the Midwest. It ended agriculture in a previously fertile region. Thousands of these farmers and other unemployed workers looked for work in California. Many ended up living as homeless hobos. Others moved to shantytowns called Hoovervilles, named after the then President Herbert Hoover.
1968 was one of the most difficult years Americans had ever seen. A continuous sequence of tragedies occurred that year. Vietnam was hard on all Americans. Deployed or not, everyone was affected. Family dynamics, consumerism, and everyday life was changed. One of the largest blows came on February 11th through 17th, during the Tet Offensive. 543 Americans were killed in action, and 2,547 were wounded. When news of the Tet Offensive arose, soldier morale was tarnished and public support was lost. A Gallup poll showed just how low the Hawk numbers had gotten. President Johnson's promise of a fast victory proved to be far too exaggerated. The overwhelming show of force by the NLF widened the already yawning credibility gap and set the groundwork for a decades-long erosion of public trust in government and public institutions. It could be said that 1946 was a pretty good year for Americans. Following World War II, consumers had pent up an accumulation of needs and wants. People had gone without many goods for so long that by the late 1940s, with more than $135 billion in savings from defense work, service pay, and investments in war bonds, Americans suddenly had money to spend. After a brief period of post-war economic readjustment, the American economy boomed. The demand for goods and services outstripped the supply and increased production, which created new jobs. The baby boom began with the birth rate shooting up 25% right after the war and staying high. This actually led advertisers to focus on mothers with new babies. In 1946, Truman created a President's Commission on Civil Rights. Following the group's recommendations, Truman asked Congress for several measures, including a federal anti-lynching law, a ban on the poll tax as a voting requirement, and a permanent civil rights commission. Although Congress didn't pass many of Truman's measures, he still made a positive impact on Americans.